Chapter 5. The Last Letter Home. No one opened Samuel Hallow's letter immediately. It lay on the round table beside the stove, folded into a small, uneven square. The paper had darkened with age, and a faint salt stain marked one corner. Outside Ashcombe Books, Greyhaven had settled into a bright, windless morning. The storm had passed. Sunlight touched the wet roofs and turned the harbour water to silver. Fishing boats moved slowly beyond the breakwater, and gulls stood along the stone wall with their wings open to dry. The old post box remained in its usual place across Harbour Lane, red, patient, facing the sea. Inside the bookshop, however, time seemed to have paused. Helen sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Elias Vane stood beside the stove, gazing into the fire. Daniel Harrow had placed the Blue Project lamplighter notebook inside the rusted metal box and closed the lid. Margaret remained at the table. The letter was addressed to Rose, not Helen, not any of them. For Rose, when the morning finally comes. Rose had died without reading it. Margaret thought of all the years the letter had remained hidden inside the notebook beneath Blackglass Cove. All the mornings that had come and gone while Samuel's words waited in darkness. At last Helen reached for it. "My mother would have opened it," she said. Elias looked towards her. "You are certain?" "No." Helen gave a faint smile. "But she would have wanted someone to." She unfolded the paper carefully. The writing was cramped and hurried. Some words had faded almost completely, while others remained surprisingly clear. Helen began to read silently. After several lines she stopped. "I don't think I can read this aloud." Margaret drew her chair closer. "You do not have to." "I want to hear his voice in it." She placed the letter in Margaret's hands. "Please." Margaret adjusted her glasses. The stove crackled softly behind her. Then she began. "My dearest Rose, if you are reading this, then either Arthur found a way to return for the book, or you have proved yourself more determined than every grown man in Greyhaven. I hope it is the second. I have tried to write to you several times, but the words have never seemed equal to what I must explain. I did not leave because I wanted another life. I did not forget you. I did not choose the sea over coming home. I need you to know those things before anything else." Helen lowered her head. Margaret paused, but Helen motioned for her to continue. "The Evening Star was used without our knowledge. Captain Vale had agreed to carry a naval case from a vessel waiting near the Sisters. He believed it contained records that had to be moved secretly before the weather worsened. Perhaps that is what he was told. Edward Bell and I discovered the truth only after we were underway. The case held instructions for Project Lamplighter, together with lists of civilian boats, lighthouse keepers and harbour officials who had been drawn into it. Some knew what they were doing, most did not. Daniel looked towards the blue notebook. Margaret continued. During the war, the project allowed ordinary coastal lights to carry hidden messages. A delayed sweep, a second lamp, a gap between beams. Each could mean something to a ship watching offshore. After the war ended, certain men decided the system remained useful. Smuggling could look like official work. Official work could disappear like smuggling. Boats travelled without records. Cargo entered harbours without questions. Men who asked questions were told they had misunderstood what they had seen. The evening star was only one of many. Daniel's expression hardened. So it continued after the war. Elias nodded slowly. My father suspected as much. Margaret returned to the letter. Captain Vale knew more than he admitted, though I do not believe he understood how dangerous the case had become. When the storm struck, he refused to throw it overboard. He said men would come for him if it was lost. Perhaps he was right. Edward and I escaped in the small boat. We saw the lower beacon beneath Black Glass Cove and believed it would guide us to safety. It did. But it also guided the men waiting at the signal station to us. Helen stared at the fire. Edward was badly hurt. He died before sunrise. I was locked inside the western room and questioned about the notebook. They believed Captain Vale had given it to me. He had not. I found it later in the cave after I escaped. Vale must have removed it from the case and hidden it aboard the small boat without telling us. Perhaps at the end, he tried to do one decent thing. Margaret stopped to turn the fragile sheet. The reverse side was more badly stained. I remained in the station for 3 days. During that time, I heard the men use the lower light to signal a vessel offshore. Morning Rock answered once, not with its ordinary beam. The keeper delayed the light by 7 seconds, then restored it. It was a warning. Someone at the lighthouse knew I was being held. Someone was trying to help me. Daniel frowned. The keeper at Morning Rock in 1948 was Gabriel Say. Margaret remembered the name from the earlier story. The keeper of Morning Rock. Yes. Helen looked up. Did he know Samuel? Every fisherman in Greyhaven knew him. Margaret resumed. On the 3rd night, I heard the station men arguing. They had been ordered to move me before dawn. I knew I would not be allowed to return home. Gabriel Say altered the lighthouse sequence again. 3 long sweeps. A pause, 1 short. It was the old rescue signal used before radio. It meant, the western path is clear. I broke the window latch and climbed onto the ledge. A rope had been fixed below it. To this day, I do not know whether Gabriel placed it there himself or sent someone else. I followed the light between the beams and reached the cave. Elias sat down heavily. My father arrived after that. Arthur was waiting with his boat. He had learned from Alfred Cresswell that I was alive. He intended to take me home. I wanted nothing more. We were less than 2 miles from Greyhaven when we saw another boat leave the harbour. It carried no lights. Arthur recognized one of the men aboard, Commander Rook. They were waiting for me to return. Helen whispered, "So Samuel turned back." Margaret read on. I knew that if I reached the village, they would search every house connected to me. They would question your aunt, they would question Arthur, and they would question you. I could not lead them home. I asked Arthur to take me east. He refused until I threatened to jump overboard and swim. I was not in a condition to swim. He knew it, but he also knew I meant to try. A small laugh escaped Elias despite the sadness in his face. That sounds like my father. We reached Keeper's Reach shortly after sunrise. There was an old cottage above the inlet, used by lighthouse maintenance crews before the road to St. Aura was built. Arthur left me there with food, dry clothes, and the notebook. He promised to return in 3 days. I told him not to. I told him that if he came back, the men following him would find me. He returned anyway, but by then I had gone. Elias closed his eyes. Helen looked at him. Arthur never knew where. No, Elias replied. He spent the rest of his life trying to find out. Margaret continued. I travelled north using another name. For several months I worked on farms and fishing boats. I intended to return when the search ended. It did not end. Twice I saw men watching places where I had stayed. Once in a railway station I recognised Commander Rook. He had aged very little. I realised then that returning to Greyhaven would never be safe while the lamplighter records remained missing. I hid the notebook in the cave and wrote this letter. I trusted the lower light to show Rose where it was. I trusted Arthur to tell her. I trusted time to make the danger smaller. In all 3 things, I may have been wrong. Margaret looked up. Samuel returned to Black Glass Cove to hide the notebook. Daniel nodded. After travelling north. That means he came back near Greyhaven. But not home. Helen pressed her hand to her mouth. Margaret read the final section more slowly. Rose. I cannot ask you to forgive me for leaving. A father should be there to explain the world to his child, not disappear into it. I thought staying away would protect you. Perhaps I only exchanged one kind of danger for another. You may have spent years believing I chose not to return. That is the thought I cannot bear. I loved you every day. In every harbour, I looked for the shape of Greyhaven. In every lighthouse, I watched for Morning Rock. Whenever I saw a red postbox, I imagined placing a letter inside and pictured it crossing the country until it reached your hands. I never sent one. Cowardice sometimes wears the clothes of caution. I understand that now. Helen was crying silently. Elias stared at the floor. Even Daniel looked away towards the window. There is one final truth. I did not spend my life alone. In 1956, I settled in a village called Penmaris on the western coast of Ireland. I became a boat builder. I married a woman named Maeve, who knew my real name and guarded it more faithfully than I deserved. We had a son. I told him about you. I told him he had a sister in England who once knitted me a blue scarf and became angry when I sailed in bad weather. He knows where this letter is. One day, when the men involved are gone, he has promised to carry my final message to Greyhaven. If he has failed, do not blame him. We all inherit promises we are not sure how to keep. Remember only this: I tried to come home. And every morning that followed, some part of me was still on the road back to you. Your loving father, Samuel. The fire settled with a quiet sigh. Margaret lowered the letter. No one spoke for a long time. At last Helen said, "He had another child." "A son," Elias replied. "Then there may be family in Ireland." Daniel opened the rusted box and removed the envelope that had first appeared in the bookshop. For the person who remembers. He studied the handwriting. This may not have been written by Samuel. Margaret looked towards the final letter. No. Samuel's hand was different. Then perhaps his son sent it. Helen shook her head. How would he know I had come to Greyhaven? No one could explain. Margaret thought of the post box, the envelopes appearing without footsteps or witnesses, and the way each message had arrived at precisely the moment it was needed. Perhaps there was an ordinary explanation. Perhaps someone had watched Helen enter the village and set the entire chain in motion. But ordinary explanations, Margaret had discovered, did not always account for everything. Sometimes they explained the mechanics of a mystery and left its timing untouched. Elias rose from his chair. My father would have wanted to hear this. He may have known some of it, Helen said. No, not enough. Elias touched Samuel's signature. He believed he had abandoned his friend at Keeper's Reach. It would have mattered to him that Samuel built another life. Daniel turned to the first pages of the Project Lamplighter notebook. There are names here. Dates, boats, payments. Do they matter now? Helen asked. Historically, yes. Legally? Most of those involved will be dead. Margaret looked at the list of civilian carriers. What of their families? Daniel considered this. The notebook could correct several false records, boats officially lost elsewhere, men accused of theft, harbour workers dismissed for asking questions. Then it should not be hidden again, Helen said. No. Daniel closed the book, but it must be handled carefully. An archive would be best, somewhere the documents can be preserved and studied without turning Samuel's life into a spectacle. Helen nodded. I don't want headlines. You may not avoid them entirely. I don't mind the truth being known. I mind it being made loud. Margaret understood. Some truths needed daylight. That did not mean they needed shouting. The bell above the shop door chimed. All four turned. The door was still locked. No one stood outside. Margaret crossed the room and looked through the glass. Harbour Lane was empty. The post box remained across the road. Something pale lay on the shop floor beneath the letter slot. Another envelope. Daniel gave a weary laugh. I had begun to think it was finished. Margaret picked it up. There was no wax seal, only a name written across the front. Helen Hallow. Helen accepted it. The paper was newer than the others. The edges were clean, and a modern Irish stamp had been attached to the upper corner. There was a postmark, Penmaris. Helen stared at it. This one came through the ordinary post. Apparently so, Margaret said. The envelope had been redirected twice. An old address had been crossed out. Beneath it, someone had added the name of the guest house in Greyhaven. Helen opened it. Inside was a short, handwritten note. Dear Helen, you do not know me, but I believe our parents were brother and sister. My name is Michael Hallow. My father was Samuel. I have spent many years trying to find Rose or her family. 3 weeks ago I received a letter with no return address. It said Rose had died, but that her daughter would soon visit Greyhaven. It told me to write to the Gull's Rest and trust that the letter would find her. I hope it has. If you are willing, I would very much like to speak with you. There is more I can tell you about Samuel. He died peacefully in 1989. His final words were about the lighthouse at Morning Rock. Yours sincerely, Michael. Helen pressed the note against her chest. He died in 1989. Margaret placed one hand on her shoulder. He did not die alone. No. And he remembered. Helen nodded. Outside, a delivery van stopped beside the bakery. 2 children ran past the post box on their way to school. The village moved through its morning without noticing that an absence lasting nearly 80 years had finally acquired an ending. Elias looked towards the ceiling. My father would have liked that. Daniel picked up the envelope. There is an address. Helen smiled through her tears. Yes. A real one. A very real one. Margaret made another pot of tea. They sat around the table while Helen read Michael's letter again. Then she read Samuel's final message once more, this time silently. The bookshop opened late that morning. By 10 o'clock, the rusted box had been placed safely in Margaret's upstairs room. Daniel took the project lamplighter notebook to the harbour office, where he locked it in the old record safe until arrangements could be made with the county archive. Elias walked slowly to the guest house to rest. Helen remained beside the stove, writing a reply to Ireland. She began 3 times. The first version was too formal. The second attempted to explain everything. The third consisted of only a few lines. Dear Michael, your letter found me. I have just read our father's final message to my mother. There is a great deal I want to ask and a great deal I would like to tell you. Most of all, I would like to hear what his voice sounded like. Please, write back. Helen. She folded the page and placed it inside an envelope. Margaret handed her a stamp. Will you post it? Helen looked across the street. The old red post box stood in full sunlight. I think I should. They crossed Harbour Lane together. A cool breeze had begun to move in from the sea. Morning Rock was visible beyond the headland, pale beneath the clear sky. Helen paused before the postbox. So many letters, she said. So many years. Do you think it knew? Margaret considered the question. I think someone knew. That isn't quite the same. No. Helen slipped the envelope through the opening. They heard it fall inside. An ordinary sound. Paper against metal. Nothing more. Yet Helen kept her hand on the postbox for a moment. Thank you, she whispered. Margaret did not ask whether she was speaking to Samuel, to the village, or to the postbox itself. Perhaps it did not matter. They returned to the shop. Over the following weeks, Greyhaven resumed its usual rhythm. The story of the Evening Star spread slowly. The county archivist came to examine the lamplighter notebook. Several missing vessel records were reopened, old harbour ledgers were compared, photographs identified and names restored to reports from which they had once been omitted. No great scandal followed. Too much time had passed. Instead, there were smaller corrections. A plaque in the harbour office was amended. Edward Bell's family learned that he had survived the wreck and died on shore. Captain Vale's part remained uncertain, neither wholly villainous nor innocent. Gabriel Say, the keeper of Morning Rock, was credited with aiding Samuel's escape. Arthur Vane's name was added beside his. Alfred Cresswell's role was recorded more carefully. A frightened man who had obeyed the wrong people, then spent the rest of his life maintaining a beacon in case the man he failed might one day return. The lower light beneath Black Glass Cove was not relit. It had completed its work. Helen remained in Greyhaven for another month. Michael wrote back immediately. His second letter contained a photograph of Samuel as an older man standing outside a boat builder's workshop in Penmaris. His hair was white, his face was weathered. Around his neck, tucked partly inside his coat, was a faded blue scarf. Helen recognized it at once. Rose had knitted it before his final voyage. In December, Helen travelled to Ireland. She returned the following spring with stories, photographs, and a small wooden model of the evening star that Samuel had carved late in his life. She placed the model in Ashcombe books beside the stove. On its base, he had engraved 4 words: "The way home remains." Margaret gave it a place on the mantelpiece. Years later, visitors would ask about the model. Sometimes Margaret told them the whole story. More often she said only that it belonged to a man who had taken a very long time to come home. The postbox continued to stand at the end of Harbour Lane. Its paint was renewed. Its brass plate was polished. The council once again proposed moving it closer to the main road, and once again the village objected. Letters entered it each day. Birthday cards, bills, applications, condolences, apologies written late at night. News sent to people far away. Most travelled by van to the sorting office and continued through the ordinary machinery of the postal service. But every so often, someone passing early in the morning claimed to see an envelope already waiting beneath its flap. No one could ever agree on who had placed it there. Margaret never tried too hard to find out. She had come to believe that a mystery could be true without being fully explained. The important thing was not how the letters arrived. It was that they arrived before hope had entirely disappeared. One evening near the end of autumn, Margaret closed the bookshop and stood outside beneath the harbour lamp. Rain had begun to fall. Beyond the breakwater, Morning Rock started its evening watch. Its beam travelled over the sea, crossed the harbour and touched the red roof of the postbox. Then it moved on. Margaret waited. There was no second light beneath the cliffs. No envelope appeared. No warning was needed. Across the water, the lighthouse beam completed its circle and returned exactly when it should. Steady, patient, never hurried. Margaret smiled and turned towards home. Behind her, the postbox faced the sea. It had delivered its final letter. For now,